Okay, assalamu alaikum and good evening to everyone. Um, this is an update about the TIVA boycott campaign that's active both in the UK and internationally. I'll be focusing mainly on the British element of this. Of course, things are a little bit different here. Uh, we have a socialized healthcare system, which means that the campaign takes a particular shape here compared to how it does in somewhere like the US, for example. But I'm also going to just couch the campaign in some of the broader activist work that we've been doing. And I've made it a little less technical than the last one, which focused a lot on some of the technicalities of how drugs get from the pharmaceutical companies to the uh, to your high streets. So I'm hoping that this will feel a little more relevant and also be a lot more connected to previous activist work that has resulted in positive changes historically. Okay, so as I said, very brief history of activism, particularly with regards to medicine, which has often been very patchy and uh, somewhat wanting, I would say. Um, I'll mention the recent BMA motion, which is a positive step towards supporting healthcare workers, not just doctors, but healthcare workers who want to create a more ethical workplace where the products that we are using as part of our work are not supporting Israel's genocide. I think Tiva's recent legal troubles are worth mentioning also. And then there'll just be a little practical stuff at the end, which it reiterates what we talked about at the last webinar. But I think we just need to keep emphasizing the concrete measures we need to take to defund the genocidal machinery. Okay, so you will find in the medical profession that there have been there have been some activists, but you probably won't have heard of most of the people on the list. And the medicine generally celebrates the those who advance the interests of the pharmaceutical industry or the biotechnology industry more broadly. And you'll find that those who have been involved, particularly in, for example, peace activism, which seems to have been a home for a lot of doctors involved in activist work. You'll find that most of those names are almost completely unknown. Indeed, the only book that's been written on doctors' involvement in anti-war activism, that there's literally only one book that's ever been printed on it. It's long out of print. You can still find copies of it if you look online. For a kind of a more analytical look at how the medical profession relates to capitalism and imperialism in general, I would recommend those two books. I think Vicente Navarro's book, in particular, he wrote quite a few books on healthcare in the capitalist system, but I found that one particularly useful. It's quite a short text; it's only about 120 pages. So I've found it helpful to try and think of how boycotting operates within a broader activist movement. You know, there are so many different things that we can all do. You know, and all of them are legitimate. They all have their place. They're all very useful. And I think it's useful for us to kind of think and recognize what are the pros and cons of each one. And that allows each of us and our own personalities and our own networks to then decide where we are best placed to operate. We've all got our own little role, I think, in ending Israel's genocide and indeed in ending the existence of an apartheid regime in the Middle East. We all have our own strengths, and I think recognizing where we are best placed I've found it personally to be helpful. The great thing with boycotting is, of all of the measures that can be taken, possibly with the exception of direct action, it's the only one that directly defunds the target. Anyone can get involved in it. And again, relating back to Navarro's conception of capitalism, healthcare within capitalism, and of course that affects academia as well. It is perhaps unsurprising that the role of boycotting has been very poorly documented, even in academia. You'll find that you really have to scratch around to find papers and books that have indicated the efficacy of boycotting as a means to end injustice historically. But I will again emphasize there is no other form of action that directly affects funding of its target other than boycotting. So there have been a few notable cases. The one that just due to recency, I think the one that most of us probably are most familiar with is the boycott of South Africa. Um, uh, it was interesting to see that there were surveys done on this in the 80s, and but based on survey data anyway, about a quarter of all British people expressed that they were involved in boycotting South Africa in 1985, and of course apartheid fell in I think it was 1990. But this went on for decades. This went on from the 60s. And I have to say, the other example on the screen is one which is far less discussed, and that was the plantation sugar boycott from the 19th century. So the pamphlet that's on the screen there, that was the most widely circulated pamphlet of the entire 18th century. And 400,000 people is, of course, it's rather impressive. And certainly back then, the population of the UK was 8 million. So this is a pretty impressive number of people. It is still a minority. And that's another point I'd like to emphasize, please. And that is that you don't have to boycott 100% of everything that is Israeli all the time, even if you achieve a 75% boycott or an 80% boycott, you will be able to bring down these companies, and indeed, inshallah, will be able to bring down the entire genocidal regime. These are, I'll whiz through a couple more cases. This was a famous case from the 80s. So this was a young lady who refused to handle a Cape grapefruit. And some of the younger people in the audience may not know how ubiquitous Cape fruits were. I still remember when I was very young, these were extremely common to find South African fruits in the supermarket. So this young lady refused to handle the sale of this grapefruit and was then suspended from work. And in solidarity with her, 11 other store workers went on strike for just under 3 years. For that entire time, they were on strike pay alone, which was barely enough to earn barely enough to live on. And it was only when the Irish government banned the import of all South African goods in 1987 that they went back to work, which I have to say is rather impressive. And the somewhat reminiscent of that is this anonymous worker who's really insisted on remaining anonymous. This was just last year, a Tesco worker who refused to handle Israeli goods, also in Ireland, this time in occupied Northern Ireland. He or she was eventually allowed to go back to work again in Ireland as recently as you think the genocide, the most recent genocide in Gaza, started in October, and then within a month, O'Neill's is a sports store in Ireland, and within a month, O'Neill's staff were refusing to handle Puma goods. leading to the company removing all the stock. It's fascinating to just see how implicated our Western media apparatus is in all of this. You will not find a single article in the BBC about this. Okay, so Tiva has it actually started, but before the founding of the modern Israeli state. The key thing that I would like to just emphasize is that it is the largest manufacturing company in Israel. The majority of its profits come from generic drugs. Um, it has been moving more into producing proprietary medicines. So these are medicines that will be unique to them, which they can patent. And normally these patents last 15 years. There are tricks that drug companies use to try and extend that. But so far, their success in this has been limited. They are primarily a generic drug company. They make drugs that are copies of existing drugs, and you can nearly always find an alternative company that produces exactly the same drug. So BDS recently designated Tiva as a priority pressure target. Not only recognize Tiva on there, but you'll also recognize other companies which are used in the NHS. Hewlett Packard being one. That's, I think, a concern for the future. For the time being, the focus, at least the focus in this presentation, will be on Tiva, but there are other companies there that need to be addressed as well. So the BMA is the medical union for the medical profession. It's certainly one of the most powerful unions in the UK, and there was a motion passed just this summer where the key point here was that there was an overt recognition that procurement contracts that the NHS has can inadvertently support human rights abuses, and environmental harm is there as well. That's not something that the BMA has recognized before. And simply just by recognizing that, notwithstanding the support that they have pledged for its members who wish to challenge these contracts, simply by recognizing that, it makes it very clear that for doctors, healthcare workers who want to then take a stand on saying, like the preceding examples that I gave, to say, well, actually, I would rather use an alternative company's products to treat my patients. That is now a totally legitimate position to take. Okay, so there is a long list of legal disputes that Tiva's had. I would like everyone here to use the QR code to sign the petition that Global Health BDS for Palestine has been running to try and get them effectively isolated by this particular initiative that the UN runs. But the reason why this is particularly relevant here is we have a list on there of quite a detailed list of their previous legal troubles. It's really quite extensive, and most of their cases are settled out of court. In particular, it's almost an unimaginable amount of money. They were also convicted of. They were also involved in the US opioid epidemic legal challenges. It wasn't just Purdue Pharma. Tiva was involved in this as well. They ended up settling the case, and the settlement bill came to 4.25 billion US dollars. That was a settlement. So they accepted no fault for any involvement, any responsibility in contributing to the epidemic. though part of the settlement arrangement included funding rehabilitation programs for opioid addicts. Now, there is a key point here, and that is that Teva repeatedly claims that they are supportive of the NHS because they produce high quality generic drugs. However, one thing you'll find if you look at the list on the QR code that I put up earlier, Teva, when becomes aware of a rival company that wishes to bring a generic drug to the market, which of course might threaten Teva's profits, Teva then tries to block its entry. I should also mention this case, which I think I'll be amazed if nobody here knows about it. So this drug Humana, so price fixing is something that Teva has been involved in for a long time. And this case is going to the US. I don't think it's the Supreme Court, but it's one of the US courts next month. What is particularly interesting about it is that Teva has made a specific request to the court that its identity as an Israeli company be concealed from the jury. And the reason being that they've tried to make the claim that the Israeliness of the company might bias jurors given the negative publicity that Israel has received over the last few years. Now, I do hope that it would be wonderful if anyone in the audience has some connections with the legal team here, Humana's legal team. I was really stunned to see that Humana agreed to this request. This is despite the fact that Teva have openly stated that they support the government's actions. This is not just an isolated statement. They've stated this repeatedly. They often refer to themselves, perhaps in a way which is reminiscent of Nazi Germany, IG Farben in Nazi Germany. They refer to themselves as a national pharmaceutical company. They are actually a private company, but if we are funding an Israeli company, then we are indirectly funding the Israeli government. Teva does pay taxes to the Israeli government. Okay, so this is a historic policy that Teva had for an adopter battalion. I'll leave it to those who are interested to look into this a bit further. It's just one of those typical bizarre Israeli policies that just highlights how militarized the society is. Okay, so the core product lines that Teva has are the novel proprietary drugs, which I mentioned earlier. First of all, they are still a minority, and boycotting proprietary drugs is difficult, even for doctors. So once again, let me emphasize: a boycott doesn't have to be 100%. Even if you boycott 75% of their, or even 50% of their product line, you're doing very, very well indeed. And I'm sure some of you will recognize the products on screen: Sudocrem, Infocol, Peptac, very common. Sudocrem used to be it was actually invented by an Irishman, but the company was bought out by Teva. What is particularly interesting, and I'm hoping we've got some international people in the audience as well. In the UK, Sudocrem is labelled with the Teva logo, but in Asia, so in Malaysia and Indonesia, both of which have a strong anti-Israel stance. Both at the government level as well as at the level of the general public. And they use a different logo. So they use the activist logo. And this is almost certainly in order to mislead its customers in Malaysia, in Indonesia, so they do not know that they're actually buying an Israeli product. I'd encourage you to look at the Global Health BDS for Palestine Instagram page, where we've got a list of alternatives. There are loads of alternatives to pseudocreme, and let me emphasize that so much of this kind of stuff is used out of habit. It's like things like razor blades, shaving foam, so many household products that are used on our skin or for our what we think is for our health. So much of it is really just a case of habit buying, and there are loads of alternatives. Okay, so here's an example. I wouldn't encourage people to do this, but I just thought I would take a photo of that. This is something that I happened to see while I was out in the UK. So Infocol is another one of their products. Again, very, very commonly available drug, simethicone. And I think you'll struggle to find a pharmacy that doesn't contain other simethicone preparations. They're very common. You don't have to buy the Infocol version. There are loads of alternatives to Infocol, which are just as effective. Once again, here's just an alternative. I'm not encouraging this. I'm simply illustrating some of the ways in which people have been acting. And Peptac, I wouldn't say Peptac is especially common in the UK. It's reasonably common. Gaviscon is certainly the most common indigestion medication, liquid indigestion medication in the UK. Again, very, very easy to find alternatives. So I would emphasize, if you're only going to do one thing, the thing to do to get Tiva off of your medicines list or off of your family's medicines list is to simply ask your pharmacist that I do not want Tiva medicines unless there are no alternatives. If there are no alternatives, you will have to have the Tiva medicines. Again, I will once again emphasize the boycott does not have to be 100%. You will find that in most of your medicines, you will not have to take Tiva versions. You can speak to your doctor about it as well, but again, for technical reasons I won't get into, actually the doctor doesn't have a great deal of influence over the brand of drug that is dispensed at the pharmacy. That is controlled by the pharmacist. Okay, so here is a list, and you'll find this list on the again on the Global Health BDS for Palestine Instagram page. This is primarily aimed at prescribers, doctors, pharmacists. Very easy to use. We have specifically picked very commonly used drug categories here, and it's a very simple principle how you use this guide. You maximize prescriptions from the right-hand column, minimize prescriptions from the left-hand column. Again, doesn't have to be 100%, but the more you use this, the easier it becomes, and eventually it becomes quite natural. So in my own job as a hospital consultant, I now never start patients on Ramipril. I now very rarely start patients on amlodipine because I'm sufficiently confident using nifedipine MR. I am now used to the doses of using, for example, irbesartan, valsartan, perindopril. And of course, the same follows for all of the other drugs on the right-hand column there. So this is just a very simple example to illustrate just how many alternatives there are. There are even more than are on this slide. There are loads and loads of generic drug companies out there. There is nothing special about the Tiva version of any of these drugs. Sometimes patients may say the taste is slightly different, the taste of the capsule, the taste of the tablet, that kind of thing. But these are relatively trivial issues. And it's easy enough I'd say about 95% of cases for anyone to simply say to their pharmacist, I don't want the Tiva version. Can I have an alternative, please? And your pharmacist will be able to fulfill that request. Indeed, they are duty bound to do their best to fulfill patients' requests. Now, this is an interesting initiative that was ongoing. Well, it's still ongoing actually in New Zealand. So there are, I think there are about 20 different versions of this particular blood pressure drug called ACE inhibitors. And one of them is this drug called salazopril. What's especially interesting about this is there is only one company in the world that makes it. But in New Zealand, this was the most commonly used version of this class of blood pressure medicines. So if you look on the website here, and this is really just to add some support for doctors, prescribers, to feel more confident in switching people, or at least discussing with your patient, would you like to switch? If you have a patient who you think would be interested in boycotting Israel, then you can ask them, would you like to switch to a version of your drugs, which means that you will never get an Israeli version. You will never get a Teva version. Well, it just so happens that in New Zealand, there was actually a government sponsored initiative to switch people from salazopril onto alternative blood pressure medicines because of the vulnerability that existed in the New Zealand market, since only one company in the world made this particular version. Okay, so this is technical. This is mainly directed at doctors and pharmacists. I wouldn't expect the general public to be thinking about this side of things, but just a little nugget there for doctors and pharmacists. You should feel confident in switching people to an alternative, but I would advise speaking to your patient about it first. I think they probably won't appreciate you switching their medicine over completely without being informed of the reason. I've increasingly been doing that in my own clinics. And I'll say to patients who I think would be interested, are you aware that this drug you're receiving is from an Israeli company? And they've been delighted when I've changed it for them. So I would encourage people to do that with patients who you think would be interested. Okay, so this is simply an alternative to, for example, cilazopril. You can use an enalapril. There are a whole bunch of other drugs. Okay, so blood thinners are simply another example here. So edoxaban, which is a very common blood thinner, is not made by Teva. So if any patients are on rivaroxaban or apixaban, there's nothing wrong with asking your GP or your pharmacist to say, is there any chance I could be switched to edoxaban or to a non-Israeli version of my blood thinner? Okay, that's really the thing to emphasize. I do not want to receive any Israeli medicines. Can you switch me to an alternative if I'm receiving any Israeli medicines? 95% of the time, it is quite easy to switch you to an alternative. Now, inhalers are actually big business for Teva. Once again, very easy to switch. All of these medicines, including the one at the top left, Iavax, are made by Teva. Teva bought out Ivax, and it's something that Teva specializes in, which is acquisitions of smaller pharmaceutical companies, and they often then don't change the name of the company. And it just so happens that that allows them to conceal their identity somewhat. Very easy to switch. Again, if you're not sure, just let your pharmacist know. I don't want to receive any Teva medicines. Can you please check my medicines and switch me over if possible? Okay, and the list that we have, again, on the Global Health BDS for Palestine website is very easy. Maximize prescriptions from the right-hand column, minimize prescriptions from the left-hand column. And if you have any concerns, let your pharmacist know, let your GP know. I do not want to receive any Teva inhalers, please. Okay, so that's our summary. I'd be keen to take any questions. I think we've got time for some questions. I'd encourage people to scan the QR code if you have the ability to do so now. Global Health BDS for Palestine is the main um, medical boycott group for the UK. We've got various campaigns, but we are particularly motivated to try and get Israeli products out of the NHS, whether that be Palantir, whether that be Oracle, whether that be Teva. At some point, I think we do need to start talking about Hewlett Packard, all these other companies. I'd encourage people to join, particularly if you're a healthcare worker. We're very much driven by professional interest and trying to make an NHS that is actually representative of what the British people want. The British people do not want to support Israel anymore. And we want the NHS to reflect that. Thank you. I wonder if there are any questions. So, oh, sorry, someone's left a question there. It's called Global Health BDS for Palestine. It's in the top right hand corner. Okay, so someone's left a comment here saying, not a question as such, but useful that many of the inhalers that TIFA produces are no longer recommended in asthma and COPD guidelines, such as QVAR. Also, pressured metered-dose inhalers have a high environmental impact, so usage of Salamol will reduce over time, hopefully. That's exactly right. Of course, a lot of people, they're already on QVAR, and they were on it historically. And as I'm sure all the pharmacists and doctors will know, it's so common that people, when they are used to a medicine, they will stay on it for decades. That is how the pharmaceutical industry makes a lot of its margin. It's from small margins sustained over decades. So even though it's no longer in the guidelines, you're quite right. A lot of these patients will remain on QVAR for decades. And I would say, if you have a patient who you think would be interested, then mention it to them. You know, the BMA will support you in your desire to have more ethical procurement practices in the NHS. There's nothing wrong with asking. And I ask my patients quite frequently when I have a patient who I think would be interested, would you like to switch to an alternative inhaler? The environmental impact thing is interesting. That was one of the reasons, one of the ways in which Salamol was able to gain quite a large market share, because when the shift towards CFC-free inhalers was announced in the NHS, the market share for Salamol over Ventolin increased quite dramatically. Someone's asked, can we share this with WhatsApp groups, medical and otherwise? Of course, yes. Has Global Health approached the big pharmacy chains about not supplying Teva drugs such as Boots? So, this is a tricky one. So I have approached, personally, I've approached pharmacists on this particular issue already. This again gets a little bit complicated. So there are three main wholesalers for pharmaceutical products in the UK. One is called Alliance. The other one is called Phoenix, and the third one is called AHA. Boots's main supplier is Alliance, and attempts to get Boots to change its procurement practices in the past have not been successful. However, there are lots of medium and small pharmacy chains in the UK who have been very quietly boycotting Teva. For reasons that I'm sure most of you can gather, they have tended to be quiet about it. There was an instance, as I'm sure some of you know, of a pharmacist in pharmacy in North London that advertised that it was boycotting Israeli medicines, and the premises was attacked. We all know that these businesses, they don't really have any ethics. So I think it's going to take much more activism coming from healthcare professionals, and for that to be visible before the big chains are likely to cancel any contracts. And that work is down to us. Adil Khawaja was okay. So yeah, the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. Yeah, you're probably aware that there was an attempt to get the Royal Pharmaceutical Society to take a position on this earlier this year. And so the motion was put forward and very narrowly lost. I don't think that is because of pharmacists wanting to support Teva medications. I think that is simply because thus far, and I was kind of alluding to this earlier when I was talking about medical activism, pharmacists, like doctors, are mostly not politically active. And this needs to change. There is nothing to stop pharmacists lobbying their own organizations. And doctors are certainly not doing enough. So it's up to all of us, really. I have no doubt that if this was attempted again next year, with a bit more grassroots work within pharmacy and medicine and all associated healthcare workers, we can get all of our unions and professional institutions to take more vigorous steps towards disconnecting Israel from the NHS. I'm just going through the Q&A list here, so I'm sorry, I don't think I think I'm on my own at the moment. I don't think I've got a helper. So, are there any common medicines that are only supplied by Teva? Common, no, is the short answer, and that's why I would emphasize that this is a very easy boycott, particularly because you don't really have to do any work. The pharmacist does all the work for you. Even if you're talking about over-the-counter medicines, for example, if you like Sudocrim, if you found it to be effective, there's nothing to stop you taking a pot of Sudocrim to the counter and saying to the pharmacist, do you have any similar alternatives, please? It just so happens that we've actually made it very easy for you in Global Health BDS for Palestine, because we already have a list on the Global Health BDS for Palestine Instagram page. It's very, very easy. This is an international list. There, you can literally be in almost any country in the world, and you'll be able to find an alternative to Sudocrim just by looking at the list on the Global Health BDS for Palestine page. With drug budgets getting tighter for the NHS, oh gosh, sorry, there's lots of questions coming through. The drug budgets getting tighter for the NHS, medicine shortages, etc. Will there be any potential dialogue with the NHS England, who currently negotiate with pharma companies directly for large medicines purchasing contracts? Yes. Again, this is, I think this is really a movement that needs to gain a critical mass. I want to see that it is normal, not just a fringe group. It is normal for doctors to be talking like this in the workplace. If we're talking about the environmental impact of our medicines in the workplace, which has already happened, volatile anesthetics have been gone for, I think it's about 10, 15 years now in the NHS, because that's nothing to do with patient care. That's purely to do with the impact on the environment. So why is it not normal for us to be talking about the impact of our prescribing on supporting genocide. That should be completely normal. Once we have normalized it, once we have more of a critical mass, I think getting that dialogue with NHS England will be much more successful, as opposed to it being representative of simply a fringe minority group. How do you decide if a patient is interested in your discussion? Because I get to know my patients in clinic. I may have missed this as I joined late. Are there any other well-known items on shelves as well as pseudocreme? Yeah, so Infocol is a big one. Peptac is another one. Teva also produces levothyroxine and is not an uncommon prescribed medication. Alternative companies called and others. Again, there are just loads of suppliers for levothyroxine. There is no reason as to why in 90, probably closer to, I mean, I'm probably being modest here, is probably more like 98% of cases. There is just no reason as to why you have to insist on taking the Teva medication, but that small minority of cases does exist. Levothyroxine, you don't have to take the Teva medication. You can take an alternative version. There are loads of suppliers. Oh gosh, sorry, I'm just struggling a little bit to keep up. Can you expand on the ethical procurement initiatives ongoing in the UK? Have you been able to convince any local authorities to stop purchasing Teva medicines for public hospitals? Not yet, but inshallah, with your support and with the support of so many other people in the pro-Palestine movement, this will happen. Let's be clear that like the boycotting initiatives that I described earlier, such as the sugar boycott, I don't think this will be successful if it's just coming from professionals. I do think professionals have a particular form of leverage in getting these things done, but we do need support from the public as well. We need both. We need pharmacists on board, doctors on board, nurses on board, and the public. Are there any legal arguments? Oh gosh. Are there any legal arguments, not just ethical, that may have more weight when discussing with NHS high street pharmacy? Yeah, that's a really good question. There does appear to be an angle there. So there's a piece of work that we are pursuing, we are looking into, related to the Procurement Act of 2023. The problem with the Procurement Act is that there are provisions in there that effectively allow cabinet ministers to create carve-outs for companies involved in the health and defense sectors, so that the ethical the ethical guidelines, there's effectively ethical standards in the Procurement Act that effectively allow them to create a carve-out for them. So I do think that this is a piece of work that ought to be pursued. It's not easy to find lawyers who are knowledgeable on this area, but watch this space. I think this is something that we should work towards. I'm just not entirely confident that the legislative structure that exists at the moment is sufficiently supportive of justice in this area. Not sure my question made sense. I meant, are there any other stickerable, well-known products in addition to pseudocreme? Yeah, so Infocol is another one. So over the counter, Infocol and pseudocreme are really the big ones for Teva in the UK. Infocol and pseudocreme. You'll find them in pretty much every supermarket. And there are various tactics that people have been using to draw attention to the support that these products have for Israel's genocide, some of which were illustrated in the pictures. How do I get my trust to stop buying Teva or speak to patients without creating issues for myself in the current climate? Well, as I said, the BMA is now supportive of you. So if you are a member of the BMA, you're really on very solid ground here. There is nothing to stop you writing to your lead pharmacist in your department to say, I've had concerns about these particular medicines that we are using in our department because they are made by a company that is supporting Israel's genocide, openly supporting it. There's nothing to stop you. As I said, we've never been on more solid ground. The BMA has openly stated that they will support us if we are motivated by ethical concerns, human rights concerns. And there happens to be a precedent that's already been set. The Royal College of Physicians endorsed the reduction of use of products that were of volatile anesthetics and products that contain CFCs. It's really only a small step away from saying we want to ensure that we are looking after the environment versus and to then say we want to ensure that we are not supporting genocide through our prescribing decisions. Would it suffice to ask the issuing pharmacist, or does the GP need to prescribe a specific brand? Usually, just asking the issuing pharmacist is enough, particularly because more and more pharmacists nowadays have prescribing powers. That is going to increase dramatically over the coming years. I shan't go too much into the technicalities of it, but there are loads of pharmacists now who have prescribing powers. So in the majority of cases, all you need to do is speak to your pharmacist. In the majority of cases. Procurement, regional and national have ethical policies that they're committed to. NHS workers should be aware of the policy and arrange to discuss breaches with the procurement directors. Yeah, the policies tend to be related to things like support of slavery, support of environment is another one. I have not seen a procurement policy for any NHS trust that talks about human rights abuses, at least with regards to pharmaceuticals. Have there been any considerations so far to approach pharmaceutical wholesalers as a way to apply pressure and reduce their stockholding, procurement, distribution of Teva pharmaceuticals? Yes, so I have not. I think, again, I completely support, and these are just really, really good questions. I think this is why I need so many colleagues from the world from pharmacists who have relationships with pharmaceutical wholesalers. Doctors, we don't really know. I mean, I've had to do a lot of reading to understand the process of how pharmaceutical wholesaling works, how the reimbursement systems work, NHS tariffs, all of this stuff. You will find very few doctors have any understanding of this. It's just not really an area that doctors tend to know about. So once we have more and more pharmacists interested in this side of things, I think that is absolutely an avenue to pursue, to be writing to the three big wholesalers, AAH, Alliance, Phoenix, to say, actually, we are pharmacists, we are your customers, and we don't want to have to use these Israeli drugs. We want to use alternative drugs wherever possible. So what can you do to support us as your customers? So we really do need more and more pharmacists asking these sorts of questions. So thank you so much for that. Can you share a link to the leaflet of the alternative products that attendees can print locally for colleagues? It's on the Instagram page. If you want a PDF version, then if you just DM us on the Instagram page, we can send it to you. Which next steps will you take for the UN Global Compact removal of Teva pharmaceuticals? What can we do to support it? I need more signatures. So if you can share it with as many people as possible, I just need more and more people to sign it, and we will start putting the pressure on them. I have to say, so far, I just don't have enough signatures. So again, thank you for the excellent question. Can a template letter be made? I'd be happy to send it to my local trust and GP practice. On the back of the leaflet that we use, so we've got there's an orange leaflet that's kind of become I'd say it's become our trademark leaflet, the kind of the orange leaflet on our Instagram page. On the back of it is basically a little letter. So really, what you can do is just print that out and fill it in. You can do that. Um, uh, I mean, I guess you could just copy and paste the text from it. Um, uh, yeah, so we do already have something on the Instagram page for this. If you want something that's very easily copy and pastable, the thing you could look at is the Liverpool Friends of Palestine. They've got the kind of piece of text on their website which you can easily copy and paste. But I would say the easiest thing to do is to just print out one of our leaflets on the Instagram page. We have campaigned to tell the public about TIVA and asked people to tell their pharmacy they do not want TIVA. We have hundreds of signatures of people who who say they will tell their pharmacy. Where can we take this evidence? Oh, well, this is wonderful. I would say the first place to take it to would be to send it to your local strategic health authority. So oh gosh, what's it called now? It's not called a strategic health authority anymore. But you could I mean, one easy thing to do would be to take it to your local hospital. You could forward it to your local GP practice. And of course, your local pharmacist. I think the more that pharmacists know that their customers, their patients, don't want Israeli medicines, the more confident that they will feel in then telling their wholesalers, telling their suppliers, we are getting more and more patients saying that they don't want Tiva medicine, so we want you to stop supplying us with them. So I think really the thing to do is to just tell everyone who's involved, tell your GP, forward it to your GP, forward it to your local hospital, forward it to your local MP, and forward it to your pharmacist. This is a kind of evidence that can be extremely high impact. I mean, I should mention there are entire districts of Italy, districts of towns in Italy and in Belgium, where there are activists that I have close contacts with, who have completely divested. The pharmacists have completely divested from Tiva. And that was done through exactly the kind of work that was mentioned, petitions and people going and saying to their pharmacists, we have all of this evidence that shows that the local community do not want TIVA medicines. And they just kept going to the pharmacy and telling them and saying to them, have you stopped stocking TIVA medicines? And there are entire districts of Turin, of Brussels, where you will not find TIVA medicines in parts of Brussels, in parts of Turin. How do we handle the potential for any sort of disciplinary action for prescribing non-TIVA alternatives when the organization we work within recommends a TIVA product as the most cost-effective option? I would have thought if the alternative is still in the formulary for the drug class, the patient requires is still in the formulary for the drug class the patient requires, is a defensible decision. Precisely. I do this all the time. So as a consultant, it is my right to choose which medicine from the formulary I think is best for the patient. And that's my right as a consultant. And that should be your right as a GP. As a senior prescribing pharmacist, I know that they have a lot of powers to choose as well. If it's in the formulary, it is a legitimate option. If they then, if your health commissioning body, if your senior pharmacist is now getting pressured about how to cut costs by changing prescriptions, and you can deal with that at a later date. But as the prescriber, particularly as a doctor, particularly as a GP, particularly as a consultant, that is your right to choose. all right, if it's in the formulary, and it's safe for the patient, and it's a perfectly legitimate option to treat their hypertension, to treat their diabetes, to treat their atrial fibrillation, then it's a legitimate prescribing decision. Okay, I think it was mentioned in the last webinar, but boycott can also apply to any medical healthcare conference organizers that accept TIVA as a sponsor for their events. Yeah, so this actually happened last summer. So there was an event that was run by the Royal College of Psychiatrists that was sponsored by TIVA, and in fact, one of the people who's going to be the keynote speakers for it was the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and it was through local activism. Local people in London protesting about this. Writing to King's College Hospital saying, we do not agree with this, that they then quietly cancel the event. So, as I was saying with boycotting, you can't trust the historical record. I do think that Marxist analysis of history is the correct one. The historical record primarily is there to support existing power structures, and it is up to us to be doing the work. Of course, there are of course dissident historians. So people like Taj Ali writing very good work on the role of minority groups, for example, in activism in the UK. It was a history that had been basically completely ignored until Taj Ali was working on this. And as I said, there is literally one book that has been published, which is no longer in print, on doctors involved in peace activism. And that says it all, really. Okay, so we are doing the same in Ireland. Stalls on the street telling people to talk to their pharmacists about TIVA. We've also written to all our local pharmacies to ask them to commit to being TIVA last. Yeah, I like that, TIVA last. Also stickering pseudocrim. The procurement is the hard bit. But that I think that this is exactly how I think of this, actually. So I really like the comment. Once, like with the South African boycott, eventually, what we should just be aiming for is it is just normal for people to be talking about this. It is normal in the NHS for people to be talking about environmental concerns. And this is before the recent heat waves. There is no reason as to why it shouldn't be normal for us to be talking about the potential support for genocide, which is itself an environmental concern. Let's not forget. The potential support for the arms industry, for all of these things in the workplace. That is a concern for doctors that take medical ethics seriously. The issue is that GPs have to prescribe what the medicine optimizing team deem to evaluate as cost effective. For example, salbutamol inhalers are switched to Salamol. You really need to stand your ground to prescribe the alternative to TIVA products, or argue that there are either side effects from this one or that patient refuses particular brand. So it's actually to target the ICB. Yes, sorry for the outdated term. It's not the Strategic Health Authority. It's the ICB. Medicine optimizing teams are the decision makers in what to prescribe. I mean, I'll push back against that slightly. They're not the decision makers in what to prescribe. The doctor is. But the medicine optimizing team will question the prescription. That is not forcing the doctor to change. And indeed, as I said, I think you'll be surprised if you know your patients well. You'll be surprised how many of your patients are actually interested in. I will say to patients, I say, "Oh, did you know actually this happens to be made by an Israeli company? This particular medication." And you'll be surprised how many of your patients are horrified to know that. So if the patient has asked for it, for an alternative, that is an extremely powerful position for the prescription to then be changed. I just think that we should really be so confident now in bringing these conversations into the workplace. as I was alluding to earlier with some of the uh, different tactics that are used in activism. So, for example, things like mass arrests. Mass arrests have been extremely effective in preventing a crazy law from being normalized. And it's up to us to normalize discussions of human rights abuses and unethical corporate practice at work. We are doctors and we are interested in medical ethics. Medical ethics is not simply limited to your interaction with the patient in front of you. That is the whole principle behind public health. That is the whole principle behind doctors being interested in social care and social workers, and as I said, the environment and clean water and safe housing. All of these are intimately related issues. If you are supporting a genocide abroad, what is to stop that genocide from coming home? When the anti-nuclear movement was at its peak, and it had a lot of doctors involved. Let's emphasize this, and this was the part of the I would say, quite respectable history of MedAct, which was very much grew out. Well, it actually precedes it, but a big part of MedAct's history was its involvement in the anti-nuclear movement. One of their concerns was that radiation, it doesn't respect national boundaries. Neither do human rights abuses. I think that's all the questions. So I don't know if there's anything that I've missed. And indeed, we're bang on 1 hour. So
yeah, we've got through all the questions. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your knowledge. It's been really, really interesting. I'm sorry, I was trying to work through all the questions there so that you could read them. Just scroll down. So thank you very much for all of you for attending. Thank you very much for Global Health BDS for Palestine. I have put in the chat their link tree. Many of you have been asking for resources in the chat. Do please follow the link and you'll get a lot of the resources that have been discussed this evening. So thank you very much. It's been a full hour, so I don't want to take any more of your time. But thank you all for attending. This has been recorded and will be shared with attendees. So thank you all.
Thank you and good luck, everyone.
Thank you.